It was still dark outside when the alarm rang. The streets were silent, but inside a tiny corner bakery, the lights flicked on. A single father, tired yet determined, tied his apron and began another long day. His hands moved almost without thinking, measuring flour, kneading dough, shaping bread. These early hours had become his life, a routine that kept his small bakery alive. He had started the shop years ago, not for fame or money, but for survival. After losing his wife, he was left with their little girl and the heavy task of raising her alone. The bakery was his way of providing for her, a promise to never let her feel the emptiness he carried in his own heart. Every loaf he baked was more than food, it was hope for their future. But things were not easy. Customers came, yes, but not enough. Bills kept arriving, and each month was a struggle to pay rent for both the bakery and their small apartment. Still, he refused to give up. He told himself that as long as his daughter had a roof over her head and warm bread to eat, he would endure the weight of exhaustion. Each morning, before school, his daughter would sit at one of the wooden tables in the bakery, swinging her legs and watching her father work. Sometimes she would help, dusting flour on the counter or packing cookies into paper bags. She often asked, "Papa, why do you wake up so early every day?" He would smile and reply softly, "Because dreams don't wait. We have to work for them." There was a warmth in the bakery that no amount of money could buy. The regulars felt it. An old man who lived down the street came every morning for bread, even though some days he could not pay. The father always handed him a loaf anyway, saying, "Bread is meant to be shared, not counted." Small gestures like that showed his heart, even when his pockets were nearly empty. But when the door closed and the customers were gone, he often stood in silence, staring at the empty chairs, wondering how much longer he could go on like this. The ovens were old, repairs cost money, and some weeks he barely had enough to keep the lights on. There were nights when he sat at the kitchen table, bills scattered in front of him, while his daughter slept in the next room. He would whisper a silent prayer, not for himself, but for her. He wanted her to have a better life, one that didn't smell of unpaid debts and endless worry. Yet, even in the darkest days, he never lost his kindness. That was what kept people coming back. His bread wasn't just food, it was comfort. Neighbors often said that the little bakery felt like home, a place where you were treated like family no matter who you were. Still, deep down, the father knew he was fighting a losing battle. Bigger shops had opened nearby, shiny and modern, with bright signs and endless advertising. His small bakery, with its faded paint and old wooden sign, could not compete. Some days he thought about closing it down and finding other work, but then he would see his daughter's face. The bakery was part of their life, part of their bond. To give it up felt like breaking the promise he made long ago. So he kept pushing forward. Day after day, morning after morning, he rose before the sun and worked until his back ached. He carried his burdens quietly, never letting his daughter see how close they were to losing everything. For her, he stayed strong. For her, he kept the ovens hot. And while he didn't know it yet, his life was about to change. Help was coming from the most unexpected place, a person who would enter his bakery not as a customer, but as someone whose life was also falling apart. Their paths would cross in a way neither could have imagined, and from that meeting, everything would be rewritten. While the father fought silently to keep his little bakery alive, in another part of the city, a very different struggle was unfolding. A woman in her mid-30s sat in a tall glass office building, staring at numbers on a screen that refused to bring her peace. She was a CEO, someone the world saw as strong, successful, and untouchable. But behind her sharp suits and confident smile, her company was falling apart. Once, her business had been a shining name in the industry. She had built it from the ground up with nothing but determination and late nights filled with hard work. People admired her. Newspapers wrote about her. Investors trusted her. But now, all of that seemed to be slipping away. A few bad decisions. A few contracts that didn't go through. And then, the worst blow of all, a major investor pulled out at the last moment. The foundation she had built with so much care now felt like it was made of sand, crumbling under her feet. Every day her phone buzzed with worried messages from her board members. Every meeting was filled with tension. And each night she lay awake, wondering how everything she had worked for could disappear so quickly. She told no one how tired she was. To the outside world, she was still the same powerful CEO. But inside she was scared. She thought of the hundreds of people working under her, people who depended on her company for their livelihood. The pressure was too heavy to carry alone. One evening, after another long day of failed meetings and unanswered questions, she found herself wandering the streets aimlessly. Her driver had offered to take her home, but she refused. She needed air. She needed space away from the suffocating world of contracts, deals, and deadlines. It was cold, and the city lights blurred as her thoughts raced. What if I can't save it? What if it's all gone? She whispered under her breath, the fear tightening in her chest. She was a woman who had always had the answers, but now she felt like a child lost in a storm. As she walked, a small bakery caught her eye. Its lights spilled onto the dark street, and the warm smell of bread drifted through the air. It was simple, almost ordinary, but something about it drew her in. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe it was the comfort she had been searching for without realizing it. Without thinking too much, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was quiet. A few wooden tables, a display filled with fresh loaves and pastries, and behind the counter, the baker. His hands were still dusted with flour, and though he looked tired, he greeted her with a gentle smile. She hadn't planned to stop. She hadn't planned to speak. But for some reason, standing there in that little bakery, she felt safe enough to let her guard down for the first time in months. And that was how two very different lives, one of a struggling single father and one of a powerful CEO, came together in a way that neither of them could have predicted. The soft bell above the bakery door rang as she stepped in. The warmth hit her instantly, chasing away the cold of the night. She stood for a moment, just breathing in the scent of fresh bread and sugar. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but it felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in months. The baker noticed her right away. He could tell she wasn't the usual type of customer who came in. Her clothes were sharp, her shoes polished, but her eyes looked tired. He greeted her simply, "Good evening," his voice calm, steady, like someone who had said it 1,000 times before. She nodded, almost shyly, and glanced at the shelves. She wasn't even hungry. She hadn't stopped because she wanted food. But something about the way he looked at her, not as a CEO, not as someone important, but just as a person, made her want to stay. After a few moments of silence, she picked a small loaf of bread. When he handed it to her, their eyes met. His were tired too, but there was something else there, kindness. It was the kind of look that made you believe that even if the world was falling apart, someone still cared. Almost without thinking, she spoke. "It smells like home in here," she said quietly. Her voice cracked a little, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed that she had revealed too much. The baker just smiled, the corners of his face softening. "That's what bread is supposed to do," he replied. "Remind us we're not alone." Something in those words touched her. For weeks, she had carried her problems like a secret weight, unable to share them with anyone. But now, in this small bakery, she felt safe enough to let a little piece slip out. "My company is falling apart," she whispered, almost as if speaking to herself. "I don't know what to do anymore." The baker paused. Most customers came in for bread, not confessions. But he didn't look shocked. He didn't ask who she was or what company she ran. Instead, he wiped his hands on his apron and said, "Sometimes success isn't about numbers. It's about people. If you remember the people, the rest will find a way." The simplicity of his words startled her. No business plan, no investor talk, just truth, plain and clear. For some reason, it felt like a lifeline. She found herself coming back the next morning. And then again, the day after that. Each time she walked in, she didn't feel like a CEO at the edge of collapse. She felt like just another person, welcome in a small place that smelled of bread and second chances. And though she didn't know it yet, those visits would change not only her life, but his as well. Because while she thought she was being rescued, she was also about to rescue him. Morning sunlight poured through the bakery windows as she stepped inside once again. By now, the baker wasn't surprised to see her. He simply nodded in welcome, sliding a warm cup of coffee across the counter without being asked. She smiled faintly, as if they had developed an unspoken routine. The shop was busier that day. A few regulars came in, chatting with the baker as if he were an old friend. She noticed how he spoke to everyone, listening patiently, offering small kindnesses, never rushing. To him, it didn't matter if a person was buying a single roll or a bag full of pastries. Each customer left with more than bread. They left with the sense of being seen. When the last customer left, she stayed behind, sitting at one of the wooden tables. She had work waiting, endless meetings and emails, but for some reason she felt drawn to stay in that quiet space. Finally, she asked him, "Why do you do it? Why keep this place going when it looks so hard?" The baker wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against the counter, thinking for a moment. "Because this isn't just a bakery," he said softly. "It's a promise." She looked at him curiously, and he went on. "When my wife passed away, I thought my life was over. But I had my daughter. She was so small, and she needed me. I didn't know how to give her the world, but I knew I could give her this. A home, a place where she feels safe, where people come not just for bread but for warmth. Every loaf I bake is for her, to show her we can survive even after loss." His voice cracked slightly at the last word, and for a moment, silence filled the room. The CEO felt her throat tighten. She had been drowning in numbers, contracts, and failures, believing that business was only about winning or losing. But here was a man who had lost so much and still found a reason to wake up every day. "Survive after loss," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. Those words echoed in her mind. That afternoon, when she returned to her office, she felt different. The stress hadn't disappeared, the problems hadn't magically solved themselves, but she carried a new kind of strength. She thought about her employees, not as names on a payroll, but as people with families, struggles, and dreams. She realized she had been fighting to save her company for numbers and reputation, but now she wanted to save it for them. That evening, instead of hiding from her team, she gathered them all. For the first time in weeks, she spoke honestly. "I don't have all the answers," she admitted, "but I believe we can rebuild. Not just for the company, but for each of you." Her words carried a sincerity that surprised even herself. The room, once heavy with silence, shifted. Heads lifted. Eyes brightened. Something changed that day, a small spark of hope returning where despair had lived. And deep inside, she knew that spark had been lit in a little bakery by a man who refused to give up on his promise. Weeks passed, and the visits to the bakery became a quiet routine in her life. She no longer came only for the bread, though she admitted it was some of the best she'd ever tasted. She came for the peace it gave her, the reminder that even in struggle, there was strength. Her company slowly began to steady. The changes she made weren't easy, cutting unnecessary expenses, speaking directly with clients, rebuilding trust with her staff. But she faced them with a determination she hadn't felt in months. Every time doubt crept in, she thought of the baker's words, of his resilience, of the way he had chosen to fight for his daughter even when he had nothing left. One morning, after another long night at the office, she stopped by the bakery before heading in. The little shop was quieter than usual. She noticed the baker frowning at a stack of papers behind the counter. Bills. Overdue notices. His smile was still there when he looked up at her, but it didn't reach his eyes. She sat down with her coffee and watched him for a while. He was still the same man who had reminded her how to stand tall in her own battles. But she could see now what he had been hiding. He was fighting battles of his own, and he was close to losing. That thought stayed with her all day. By evening, she had made up her mind. The next morning, she returned to the bakery not just as a customer, but as someone ready to change his life. She waited until the shop was empty, then walked up to the counter. "You helped me," she said, her voice steady but soft. "When I was at my lowest, you reminded me of what matters. Because of you, I found the strength to save my company. And now it's time I help you too." He looked confused, unsure of what she meant. She smiled gently. "I want to invest in your bakery. not just to pay the bills, but to help you grow it. You've built something beautiful here, something people need. It deserves to survive." The baker was stunned. For a moment, he didn't speak. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the tray he was holding. "Why would you do that for me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Because you saved me first," she replied simply. "And sometimes life gives us a chance to return the kindness we've been given." It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was recognition of his strength, of the way he had given without asking for anything in return. That day, a new chapter began for both of them. Months later, the bakery no longer looked like the tired little shop it once was. The windows were brighter, the shelves fuller, the aroma of fresh bread stronger than ever. The tables were almost always occupied, families sharing pastries, children laughing, neighbors stopping by after work. What had once been a quiet, struggling shop had turned into a lively place at the heart of the community. The baker moved through the space with the same steady hands, but now there was a new energy in him. His daughter, a little taller and more confident, proudly helped behind the counter. She loved telling customers, "This is my papa's bakery," her smile wide as if she owned the place herself. For the first time in a long while, the father could look around and feel not just relief, but pride. He no longer worried if tomorrow would be the day the doors closed forever. Tomorrow now felt full of promise. And the woman who had once walked in lost and hopeless? Her life had changed too. Her company had stabilized. Her team, inspired by her honesty and resilience, rallied behind her. Clients returned. Investors renewed their trust, and slowly but surely, the foundation she thought was gone began to rebuild. But more than the numbers, it was her perspective that had shifted. She no longer measured success only by profits or headlines. She carried with her the lesson from a small bakery, that people matter first, that kindness is strength, and that sometimes the greatest investments are not in companies, but in human beings. She still visited the bakery, though now she wasn't just a customer. She was part of its story. Every time she walked in, the baker greeted her with the same warm smile, but now there was something unspoken between them, a bond formed in struggle, gratitude, and second chances. One evening, as she sat at a table near the window, she watched the father gently place a fresh loaf into the hands of the same old man who had been coming for years, still sometimes unable to pay. She smiled to herself. The bakery had grown, but the heart of it had stayed the same. The baker glanced at her then, catching her smile. For a brief moment, they shared an understanding. She had given him the means to expand, but he had given her something far greater. The reminder that strength is born from compassion, and that even small acts of kindness can ripple into life-changing decisions. Their worlds had been so different, a single father with flour on his hands, and a woman in a glass tower with a company on her shoulders. But fate had crossed their paths, and in that crossing, both had been rescued in ways neither could have imagined. And so, the story that began with loss and despair ended with renewal and hope. A little bakery became a symbol of survival, a company was saved, and two people, once strangers, became proof that sometimes the simplest encounters can change the course of life forever.